our study today, we're going to talk about, kind of titled our message, Power Plays. And we're going to talk about what power looks like from the perspective of like when people use power over you, vice versa, when you have power, how do we handle that? How do we respond to that? God made us autonomous human beings. You know what that means? It means that we have a self-will. It's one of the great things about being a human being. It's one of the terrible things about being a human being. I have a free will. Who has children? Who are the people with children in here? Raise your hand. Be proud of that. I mean, no, like some of you are like too tired to raise your hand. It came up in a fist instead of a hand, you know. Right? Or you've ever served, or you've been around the kid. Man, it doesn't take long before you discover very quickly that we were made with a free will. It's very early on, very early. You know, we wish that our kids' first words was mom, right? Mama or daddy, right? But what is it normally? No or mine? It's no or mine, right? Like, and you see it even before you can talk. You can see how quickly we move towards just like grabbing things. It's ours. And the hardest part about our autonomy or our self-will is when our self-will collides with another person's self-will. Have you ever had that? If you're married, you know what I'm talking about. If you are alive, you know what I'm talking about. When you're like, I think that it's a good idea if I speed, and then the Chula Vista Police Department says we think it's not a good idea. Your will is colliding with their will. We see this clearly, sorry about that. I see this clearly like spending so many years living a couple decades in Europe. You know, I don't know if here like certain areas are known for being worse drivers or not, but in Europe, across all of Europe, the Italians are famous for their driving. And I don't mean in a good way. They're kind of famous for their driving because you see, you have a whole like, you know, from east and west, you have a whole bunch of rule followers. Okay, I mean, all across Europe, especially when you know, you've heard of the Autobahn. Anybody heard of the Autobahn, right? Every guy wants to go there because you can drive as fast as you want. The thing is you can't afford a car that can go fast as you want. You just got to remember that. Everybody's like, I want it. And then you're in a Ford Escape. You know, it's like not going anywhere. You know, Ford Fiesta. And it's like, yeah, I hit 81 almost, you know. And that was kilometers. You didn't even know. So all across, you know, you have these, I mean, but everybody, they're rule followers. If the speed is this, people will go that. If I've had to learn that here in America, that the left lane doesn't necessarily mean the fast lane. It means that whatever I want lane, and you can just go around me lane, which I use frequently. In Europe, you see people, but the Italians are kind of famous for not following direct. In fact, they made this is like 15 years ago. They did a little learning how to drive in the EU versus learning how to drive in Italy. So go ahead and roll that little video if you have that. That's it. 100% accurate, by the way. That's most people's experience when they go to... I have some friends that are Italian, and they did an internship in a church in England. And the British are amazing people, and they are rule followers, and they're kind of known for also, they will line up for everything. They call it getting in a queue. You get in a queue. And my Italian friends, they'd never stood in a line in their life. They're Italian. You just move towards the front, cut people off. You do whatever you got to do. And he said everywhere he'd go, people would line up. He said, once I stood in the middle of the road and people got behind me and just got in line. Everybody wondered what was next. And he was so surprised when he, after spending a year in England, getting on and off of those buses, the British buses, and he said, man, people love cheese. They always, every time I see them, it's cheese, cheese, cheese. They were saying cheers, but he couldn't understand them. They were getting on, and they'd say, cheers, and he's like, cheese. Gouda, provolone. He didn't have no clue what they were talking about. Here's the reality, and it's not very far off what they're happening there. When my self-will collides with someone else's self-will, it creates friction, it creates troubles, it creates problems. Maybe driving isn't your thing. Maybe it's this. Do you remember this when you really liked this girl and she came and she said, I just think we should be friends? Your will for something more collided with her will to get away from you. She didn't want anything to do with you anymore. You're like, and then the Christian one is even worse in my opinion. I just don't have a peace about it. The Lord hasn't spoken to me about it. And my will colliding with your will. So in our look at Ecclesiastes 8, Solomon looks at 3 areas of power. 3 places of power that can dramatically mess with our lives if we are not aware or careful in how we see power. The first is the power of government. The second is the power of evil. And then finally, we look at and consider the power of God. Remember, when Solomon spoke about the power of government, his name was not Solomon, it's King Solomon. When Solomon talked about the power of the government, he's literally talking about himself. He's the king. He can do whatever he wants. He has the power. So beginning in verse 1 of chapter 8, the first thing Solomon says is not about government, evil, or God. He gives us kind of a little snippet of wisdom. Verse 1 of chapter 8, who is like a wise man? Who knows the interpretation of a thing? A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the sternness of his face is changed. And so what Solomon says before he gets into government or evil or even God's power is that he says this: when people get mad, they get dumb. Not you, but other people. No. All of us. When we get mad, we get dumb. He says it better. He says we become foolish. Anger subverts. Anger does not promote wisdom. I cannot let anger rule my heart because my actions or my reactions will almost inevitably be foolish, dumb. We can't look for wisdom from an angry person. So if you're angry, don't expect God's wisdom to come pouring through you in that moment. Maybe you've heard this phrase or something kind of like it where we say, if you are frustrated or discouraged or angry, that's not a time to make a major life decision. I hate my job. Call your boss and quit right then. Wisdom would say, put the phone down, count to 10, and then do that again until you calm down. Right? Wisdom would say, don't make a decision while you're all angered up, while you're all frustrated. We don't usually make good... That's why email, and that's what... Snapchat, Instagram, these things are dangerous. You get ticked at somebody, you're like, I'll just... and 30 seconds later, you're like, I probably should have thought about that. Too late, it's gone. Start writing letters again. That'll keep you. You will never take it to the post office. You'll never... Any anger you want to express in letter, write it in a... Send a pigeon. You'll never do it. It'll never happen. Wisdom and anger don't work together. That's why the Bible says in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says it many times. He says this, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. Don't provoke your kids to anger. What's the modern day proverb of that? If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. We want to be so careful that we don't provoke our children. By the way, when does your child stop being your child? There's no age, right? So we want to not provoke our children to anger or to wrath. And so he starts beginning in verse 2, and he talks about the power of government. Let me read through verse 7. I say, keep the king's commandment for the sake of your oath to God. Don't be hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand for an evil thing, for he does whatever pleases him. Where the word of a king is, there is power, and who may say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful, and a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. Because for every matter there is a time and judgment, though the misery of man increases greatly. For he does not know what will happen, so who can tell him when it will occur? And in these verses, there's 2 times that Solomon makes reference to time and judgment. In other words, if you're speaking to the authority over you, the government, in this case he references the government, and both Old Testament and New Testament talk to us about obeying those that have been put in authority over us, which is an incredibly, there's never been a time in history in the last couple hundred years of this experiment known as democracy where those verses, it's hard to understand sometimes. When Paul said, obey the government over you, he didn't get a vote. He didn't have rights. He was a citizen of Rome, so that afforded him certain privileges, but he didn't pick Caesar. He didn't choose the Senate. Those things were, and when Solomon said that we are to obey those over us, he was literally talking about himself. He's like, you should obey government, me. You should listen to what I'm saying to you. But he tells us if you're going to speak to those over you, then know the time and have clear judgment about what you're saying and when you say it. If you don't believe me, right? Imagine, what do you do if you do get pulled over? I used that reference earlier. If you get pulled over for speeding, what do? Do you treat them disrespectfully? Of course not. If you want a ticket, you do. You might still get one. Let's be honest, we probably deserved it anyways, right? But you try, what do? You try to be nice and you try to be respectful, right? You don't disrespect authority when you're the one that's under that authority. You choose the timing and wisdom in how to respond. It's obvious that there's a way to respond to authority that's in your best interests, and that's what Solomon's trying to talk to us about. Using power against those in authority never works. It's never a good idea. You get pulled over and you're like, oh yeah, well my dad. And they're like, yeah, your dad. We see that on TV shows. It works for like 3 people. The rest are going to jail, dude. Don't do it. And you could be talking about how you talk to your boss. Maybe you got to go in and ask for a raise. There's timing and there's wisdom in that, right? There's the right time. Now you might say, you don't know my boss. There's never the right time. That could be. But there's certainly the wrong time. There may not always be the right time, but there's certainly the wrong time. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he kind of reshapes this idea of what Solomon says here when he says this: pray for those that are in authority over you. Why? Because if you and I are willing to get God's heart for people in authority through prayer, we will probably be less prone to provoke them against us. In other words, as long as and I've talked to you about this difference between seeing issues versus seeing people. And we've talked about that in how we see maybe issues that frustrate us today. And it just it grinds us I don't like this and I don't like that. And you have every right to not like or to like certain things, but you don't have the right to not like and to like certain people. Not as Christians. God's called us to love the people that He made, His creation. And so what happens is when I stop making people an issue, I can love people. Oh, those such and such. No. My friend, that person. You see, it changes everything. So when Paul tells us to consider authorities, he says stop seeing them as just some, vague government official or just the management or the boss or something. See them as a human being. How? Pray for them. Some of us are like, I'll pray the way David did. Lord, smash their teeth in their mouth. That's a prayer. I get it. That's a prayer. There could be some better prayers in there. Maybe one of them is like, Lord, give me a heart for this person because I don't have one. Lord, help me to see things from their perspective. I may not still agree with them because, friends, we've lost something so big. You can disagree and still be respectful and like people. I don't agree with you, but we could be friends. I don't agree. I didn't vote for you. But I'm still going to trust that God's put you there, and I'm going to pray, and I'm going to see you as a human being who has a family, who has grandchildren or nieces and nephews and cousins. You are a human being put on this earth for the same thing that I was, to know Jesus Christ. Instead of seeing them as the issue, oh, they're just that person, that thing. So if you and I were to start applying what Paul tells us about praying for those in authority, it might give us, we might calm down from our anger, and we might learn to respond to those in authority over us in the right way. We need to learn to respect the power that people have. That's the big issue. When we talk about autonomy and self-will, you might not agree with their power, but you definitely need to learn to respect it. Because if you don't, we get hurt. If you don't, because you're most likely, now listen, this isn't for all of us, but for most of us, we're the bugs that will get crushed. We're not the ones that will be doing the crushing. We're the ones that are going to get crushed. So with that in mind, be wise about understanding what power looks like and the people in your life who are over you. Be respectful. God, in the New Testament, we're told, put people in authority over us. Wow. Gets really muddled when we're like, yeah, but I voted. I voted. Isn't that what happened? And God says, no, that's not what happened. We need to learn to respect the power that people have. Not just power over, but even lateral power. Power that exists within your life. You got to understand that your friends have a self-will. You treat them terrible all the time, they're gone. And then you're like, oh, I just can't ever find friends. Maybe you need to rethink your friendships. Maybe they're the problem, but if all of them are gone, can I break it to you? Maybe you're the problem, right? Maybe in your marriage you need to reconsider that. Power is not about just a person over another person. It's how we exercise our self-will on the lateral level. Husband and wife. Because if you don't realize this, and listen, if you're married, let me just remind you of this. Your spouse doesn't have to stay with you. Now you're like, wait, we're Christians. Divorce is evil and wrong and it's terrible. And yet half of Christians are divorcing, so let's just talk about it on a practical level. Your spouse doesn't have to stay with you. If you treat them terrible forever, they might not stay with you. So you have to understand and respect their self-will. How am I loving this person so that they would want to stay with me? And vice versa. Am I respecting them? And the Apostle Paul speaks about that. He speaks about how we should submit to one another. He speaks about how we ought to love and serve each other. Why? Oh, because he's my husband and the Bible says that he's the boss. No, he's not. It doesn't work. You have one boss and it's Jesus Christ. After that, you have people God has put into your life, and if you don't respect their lateral power in your life, you're going to lose a lot of friends, and you're going to lose a lot of people that you love. Use wisdom, timing, and judgment. Have you discovered, if you're not married, you say, he's always talking about marriage. Someday you're going to be married, so learn these things now. If you could learn it before, trust me, it would be so much better. It'd be so much better. So don't hear marriage stuff and think it doesn't apply to me. If you're not young, and you want to get married, chances are you're getting married. So learn these lessons. But have you discovered if you're a fight or flight type person? When your spouse comes at you, when somebody is against you, if you're I'm going to fight right back, or you're kind of a flight, you run away, and then 3 days later you're like, I should have said this. Do you know which one you are? Who's our flight people? Who's the people that run from problems? Raise your hand. We love you. The rest of us love you. We want to know you. Who's the fighters? Who's my fighters? Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, you're fighters. You go for the TKO every time. You go below the belt even. You hit hard. Scratch eyes. There's no rules. We hate you, but we love you, right? You know what I'm saying? And so we got to learn to respect each other. You marry somebody whose tendency is to kind of pull away, then your scratching and clawing probably isn't going to win them over. Can I just say I've learned that from firsthand experience? That one wasn't in the Bible. I learned this one. This is one I've had. And I hope you're learning the same things. That you need to know your friends. You need to know your family. You need to know the people in your lives. You need to have the wisdom to know how to treat other people's autonomy respectfully. And to not override, to not crush, to not control, to not... Here's what happens. You grow up in a home, this is just a hypothetical, you grow up in a home where you've been pushed down and pushed down and pushed down and pushed down. And you've been pushed down in school and you've been pushed down, and then you get a job and you've been pushed down, and then over years you end up getting promoted a little bit. And then guess what? You've got people under you, and how do you treat them? You push them down. Because you never had this opportunity, now I'm going to take it. And I'm going to hurt the person below me just as I was hurt. And Solomon would say, wisdom is screaming, don't let anger be a part of how you make decisions. Verse 8, he moves on to the power of evil. No one has power over the spirit to retain the spirit, and no one has power in the day of death. There's no release from that war, and wickedness will not deliver those who are given to it. All this I have seen, Solomon says, and I applied my heart to every work that is done under the sun. There is a time in which one man rules over another to his own hurt. Sometimes someone has power, and they use that power to hurt others. We get power in certain relationships, and we can use it to hurt. Have you heard this phrase from Lord Acton? It's a pretty famous statement. He says, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Here's the part everybody forgets in his quote, great men are almost always bad men. Oops. Great men are almost always bad men, said the British, his name was Lord Acton, just John Acton. It happens to all of us. When you get consumed with your own power, then you will begin to control people. Power, when we embrace it in the negative or in the wrong ways, when it is not under the power of God, when you are not leading people in a healthy, holy, godly way, it will end in control. It'll end in control. Just consider in the world today the most severe, restrictive regimes or societies in the world today. Are they the most open and friendly? No, they have no rights there. When you think of a regime that is just controlling, the first country that comes to your mind is probably not Great Britain. It's probably North Korea. You think, here's a place that is controlling the every action, the every website, every thought. They're just controlling. They control the narrative, is how we normally say it. Because that's what happens when we're given power that is not under the Spirit of God. In our families, when one person is dominating everything, in the end it'll corrupt the entire family. When one person wants to dominate their will. Now listen, this can be a husband. This can be a wife. You ready? This could be the child. Or children. Or the cousin that's living in your house right now. I honestly made that up. If that's you, I love you. I wasn't thinking of you. Like, how does he know? Oh, no. It could be anyone. It doesn't have to be the strong-armed man that's going to take control or the woman who's nagging and controlling. No. It could be your 6-month-old. There were seasons when I felt, every parent feels this way. There's that moment when you've got that 2-month-old and you're like, they're the boss. Honestly, they're the boss. We all work for this kid. This kid can't talk, but we're all in, this kid is in charge of our lives. It happens in churches. When someone starts, they really want to serve the Lord. They fall in love with Jesus and they want to serve the Lord, and then they're given a little bit more responsibility and they become dictators. They become controllers. My way or get out. We have to learn how to use power carefully, because here's the reality. Evil is not something that's out in the world. Are you ready? It's inside all of us. It's inside all of us. I can feel good by looking and just saying, oh, the world is an evil place. But the truth of the matter is that right now in my own heart, there's evil. There's evil in all of us. That's why the Apostle Paul would say, it's by the grace of God that I am what I am. Not because I've been a Christian for a long time and I've really kind of risen to this plateau. Paul says at the end of his life, I am the chief of all sinners. What is that? Is that a dude just kind of talking about stuff, but it's not really true? He's just kind of trying to be falsely humble? I don't think so. I think it's a guy who is standing in the light of Jesus close enough to see all of his own blemishes clearer and clearer. You see, I look good when I think of just myself. I'm a great Christian when I'm all alone. That morning hour when I wake up and it's quiet, I am patient, I am loving, I am gracious. I'm amazing. Kids start waking up, phone starts ringing, and man, it's amazing how quick I become the worst person. Have you discovered that? Like, Lord, today I'm just going to love you. I'm going to be patient. You get in your car, you get cut off, and you're like, wow. All right, tomorrow I'm going to start that over again. Tomorrow is going to be a fresh new day. There's a book, it's called The Power and Paradox. It's a book called Power and Paradox. And the writer speaks on the subject of influence and power. And he says we get the idea that people become powerful by pushing their weight around. But actually, when you look at the big picture of power, people become powerful initially because they really did want to serve people. They want what's best for people. They are kind. They are caring. They have a thought for others. That's how it usually starts. But the paradox is this. That same power tends to eat away at their own character. And then his conclusion is this: it's a very rare person who can handle any level of power without it corrupting them. It's a very rare person. And all of us have had negative experiences with people who have had authority over our lives. Either you've had a good experience or a bad experience. My guess is in this room, we've had both. Maybe you've had bosses, you're like, wow, they were a great boss. Other bosses, you're like, wow, they were not a great boss. You've had circumstances in your life where you're like, man, I was glad to be under that system. Other times you're like, it was good and then it went bad. We've all experienced all of those things. And so it becomes exceedingly difficult. Let me one more thought on this. We can all see, if you're honest, the tendency and how easy it could be to move from like, I just wanted to do good to, oops, I was kind of a jerk about that thing. It's really not that far. I was just trying to help, but I think I might have been too harsh with that person. I think I might have been too demeaning to that person, or whatever it might be. It's amazing how easy it is to go from I wanted to do good for them to I think I might not have. And so then, with that in mind, think about how hard it really is. Now, I don't think we think about this very often, so it's kind of like surfacey for us. But we're going to kind of deep dive into this idea. Think about this. God is all powerful. Now, in the context of what we've just been saying, that's a little terrifying. Because if the idea is true that absolute power, and this is just a proverb, it's not biblical proverb, it's just a thought of man. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So then what does that mean about God's power? Why is it, and let's ask ourselves this question, if power causes me to become corrupted if I'm not careful, what is it in me that moves in that direction? And let me make a suggestion. Again, from another author that I was reading, he makes this suggestion, and I agree with him on this. He says, what makes man corrupt in their power is, are you ready? Write it down, remember it, insecurity. Seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Insecurity drives us and moves us to corrupting the power that we've been given. It's a need to control other people, which is really not about abusing power. It's about revealing a weakness in me. I need you to see that I'm the boss. I need you to know that what I say is the way it's going to go. Maturity says this: I can let somebody have their own power. I can be around people who have their own power, their own self-will. And so with that in mind, consider God's all-powerfulness. Think about it. What keeps God from a corruption of his own power? He's not insecure. Not in the slightest. There's not one time that God's like, oh man, I'm nervous about this. God doesn't bite his nails. He doesn't pace. He's absolutely and utterly in control. In fact, his power is so strong and he's so confident in his authority that he even says this to us: I can respond even to the messes of your life and make them beautiful. I can work all things together for good to those who love me and are called according to my purposes. God is not insecure about his power in your life and his authority in your life. God is not running around trying to make sure that he can control you and dominate you and prove to you, well, I'm God and you're not, so take it. He's completely at peace, which is why you and I get into so much trouble, let's be honest. If God was a little bit more insecure, he'd be like, hey, don't do that. Hey, don't do that. Hey, stop that. I told you no. I told you no. I told you no. I told you no. Gabriel, get him. I told you no. Insecure expression of power. You do that, I will. If you do this thing, I will hit down 5 times harder. Insecure expression of power. Insecurity that comes from mankind is what corrupts power, and it's not in God. Why am I saying all this? Can I just say something to you? Though we don't understand the power of evil, even in us and in the world we are around, listen, God is not insecure right now. Wherever you're at, whatever stage of life you're in, maybe, listen, you could be here, but maybe you're not really walking with the Lord like you should be. Maybe there's areas of your life that are not okay. And you know it, and maybe only you know it. And know this, listen, I don't mention that in a way to condemn you. I mention that to say this: God absolutely knows what's going on, and he's not insecure about it. He still loves you. He's still working. He can still work all things together for your good. What is your good right now? It's your repentance. It's my repentance. It's always my good. But God is not insecure right now. God is not nervous about what's going to happen. Evil is out there, and evil is inside, and it seeks to control and to dominate. Look at verse 10. I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This is vanity. Verse 11, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Do you know why a lot of people do evil? You know why a lot of Christians do wrong things? Because we get sick of the fact that everybody else gets away with it. That's why. If they can do it, I can do it. Or it's like this. I had a really good, you got to know your rhythms, but I had a really good Sunday, so Sunday night, God got the morning, I'll take the evening. And and none of us actually say it. Maybe you said that, pretty crazy if you did, but most of us don't say it, but we think it. It's not fair, man. That guy at my work, he's a heathen, and he gets away with everything. Dude gets promoted, and he's terrible. Or so on and so on. You heard the phrase, the wheels of justice turn fast or slow? Slow. But then the continuation of the phrase is, but they grind exceedingly fine. And we look at God and we think, God, do you not see, like if I see evil, God, why aren't you doing something about it? Because if I had power to do something, I would do something about it. Here's the problem with that. How would I respond? I would respond in anger. This week, and I see some friends who are here from there, Joy and I got to go to the Pregnancy Care Center, had a big fundraiser for their ministry and rescuing, or just helping moms choose not to have an abortion, but instead to keep their baby. We interviewed Rose and Priscilla a couple months ago, I think. And, you start hearing about what's going on. You hear facts and figures, this many. And for me, it just gets you angry. And then you think this, like if I had power, some people are going down. And then I think, wait, God does have power and he doesn't do anything. And then my assumption is this, God doesn't love. Utterly false idea. here's what's the truth. God doesn't respond in my anger. God doesn't respond in wrath. In fact, can I remind you of something? And this is so important for every issue that ever ticks you off in your life. Remember this. All of God's wrath was poured out on his son Jesus on the cross. God has no more anger towards the sin of the world. He already paid for it. God doesn't look at an issue that you hate and go, oh man, I agree, I hate that too. God looks at people and he says, they are broken, they are lost, they are in need. And so when I think of things, I think, man, if I had the power, man, if I was in charge, I would do something about it. And then God's like, and that's why you're not in charge. If you were in charge, it'd be terrible. God graciously and patiently moves. Verse 12, though a sinner does evil 100 times, and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. Verse 14, there's a vanity which occurs on earth, and there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. Again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said that this also is vanity. Really what Solomon is trying to encourage us in this is, we can't afford to burn up our time and energy stressing out on things you can't change. It's like in the end, here's the reality. Those who live wicked lives, the day will come. Those who live for the Lord, your day will come. Quit trying to make that day right now for everyone. How dare they? Because what happens is I say, that dude's evil and he's getting away with stuff. And I'm like trying to live this righteous life and I don't get away with anything. And so I'm just going to go down his path a little bit. I start with righteous indignation. It's not fair. And then I just decide if it's not fair, I might as well just do it anyways. Who cares? I prayed a prayer, I'm going to heaven, who cares? Here's the reality though. You start walking that path, it'll destroy you. The wicked are not getting away with stuff like you might think they are, is what Solomon's trying to say. You might think they are. Oh, but look at all the money they got. Solomon wants you to see money like this. More money, more problems. More money, more problems. Now listen, don't get me wrong. Some of you just prayed a prayer. Lord, give me more problems. I'll take those problems. I understand. I get it. But wisdom for you and me is let's learn from the wealthiest person on the planet at that time who says, my money brought more problems, not more true happiness. So let's be careful that we're not trying to get justice in our eyes and not in God's eyes. Galatians 6, verse 7 and 8 says this. It'll be here on the screens. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. He who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Don't worry when it's God's thing. Let God be God, and you just got to stay you. And in fact, Solomon kind of goes in this idea of your joy will be connected to you letting God be God. Your joy, or let me rephrase that, dissatisfaction will come when you try to do what is not yours to do. We got to let God be God. If you can't change it, maybe it's not worth giving up your peace and your contentment and your joy for. Please understand what I mean by that. There's things in our world that we say it's worth fighting for. Fight for those things, but don't give up your peace for that thing. Don't let it ruin you. Fight for that. Again, I think of these great people fighting for life and fighting for hope in young women's lives, but they can't give up their peace. You can't give up your contentment in Christ. There's no hope. It's never going to change. What good comes from surrender like that? Now, Solomon says, if you're going to surrender, then surrender to God. Don't surrender to a world that is upside down. Surrender to God, who sees it's an upside down world, and He's still working. He's still working. Oh, but I don't see it. Do you have any idea how much you don't see? Do you have any idea how much you and I don't see? It's a lot more than what we do see. And we need to trust God. Verse 15, I commended enjoyment. Because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. Again, I think I talked about this before where, eat, drink, and be merry. It comes up a few times in the book of Ecclesiastes, but it doesn't mean the way that we think it means. What he means is this: learn to find enjoyment in today. Eat, drink, and be merry, not because nothing matters, but because it all matters. It's all a gift from God for you today. Conversations that you might have with somebody after church. Maybe somebody you don't normally talk to, but they say something and you go, wow, I'm really glad that I talked to that person. I'm really glad that I heard that message from them. I wouldn't have been inclined to talk to them, but God knew what I needed. Do you have any idea how right now we are a super bizarre mixture of human beings? I'm thinking of this side. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not thinking of that side. I'm thinking of all of us, right? Like all of us. It's a weird, what would bring us together except for Jesus? So think about that. Think about how if God is doing that in our lives, then he knows the people that he wants to use in your life for your better. They're here right now. People that are going to help and encourage you and bless you and take you to the next place in your life, they're here right now. This is your church, they're here right now. God's going to use these people. Oh, but they're so different than me. Exactly. Maybe someone just like you isn't going to get you across the finish line. Maybe you need someone else. Friends, we got to see the world in those ways. So he says, I commend you to enjoyment. But he does this thing, Solomon does this thing, and I want you to see this, and this is the power of God working in our lives. He always compares two things together. He brings them together: work and pleasure. Labor and pleasure. Now he talks about, verse 15, I commend because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry, for this will remain with him in his labor all his days. It's hard to have, listen, let me put it like this. Solomon's so practical. Ecclesiastes is awesome. It's so practical. Here's what he's saying. It's hard to enjoy any pleasures if you don't got money. And where are you going to get the money? You got to work. So you work so that you can have pleasure in life. Right? Pleasure comes because we've put in hard work. A part of what is being stolen from us when we obsess on the wicked or when we obsess on other people's power over us is that it robs us of the enjoyment that God wants us to have now. We obsess on, but this isn't right, and this is not right, and this is unfair, and how dare they do this, and how dare they do that, when God says, listen, work and have fun. I know that sounds so non-Christian right there. Work and have fun. Is that possible? Absolutely. Jesus said, I have come that you might have life. Boring and cruel. No, wait. I have come that you might have life and that more what? Abundantly. If Jesus was boring and rigid and strict and no fun, he would never have been at that wedding in Cana. Don't invite that guy. He's lame. If you want to feel judged, bring Jesus, right? But they didn't. They're like, if you want to have a good time, I'm telling you, that guy knows how to have a great time. There's something about Jesus that is just full of joy. Now listen, it's real joy because it's holy joy. But I think sometimes we're just like, fun is bad because the world has perverted fun, but God made us for enjoyment. God made you to have enjoyment. God designed us, but listen, this is kind of not that fun. Ready? God designed us for work. Do you understand that work was not a part of the curse? There was work before the curse. Adam, name all the animals, tend to the garden, take care of stuff. He gave mankind purpose. Do you have to understand that when God sees work, God sees purpose? Now, the curse corrupted that. But you were made for work. In heaven, we were talking about this in our Connect group this last week. Like, what are we going to be doing in heaven? Sitting on a cloud playing a harp. That's hell. That's what people in hell will be doing. Sitting on a cloud playing a harp. Right? Why do we have those pictures of like heaven, you're all alone on a cloud with a harp? It's like, I don't like the harp. I don't want to be on a cloud. And I'd like to be around people. No, enjoy heaven for eternity. Love it. No. What are we going to be doing in heaven? The Bible tells us. There's going to be work in heaven. Wait a minute. I thought that I was going to be there and be free from You are going to be met on an eternal, holy way like never before in history. You will have purpose that gives you more joy than you could ever imagine. It'll be so rich and full. It's when work and pleasure are so mixed together that you can't tell which one's which. And that ain't here on earth, by the way. They say, if you love your job, it's like you've never had to work a day in your life. I never have met somebody like that. And I know people who love their jobs, right? But some days you get up and you're like, no, it's work. God didn't make you to be a workaholic. He didn't make you to just grind it out all day long, every day, every week, and then die. He made you for pleasure. But please know this, He didn't make you to be a pleasureaholic either. Life has so much value and meaning when we balance work and pleasure, labor and enjoyment. Solomon is saying, make sure that you work hard so that you can create joy in your life. That you got to have both. Sometimes we work so hard and lose sight of what we're doing it for. Kids, leave me alone. I've got to work harder. What's the point of that hard work? So that you could take them somewhere to enjoy them, but they won't know you because you didn't spend time with them, right? It becomes a vicious cycle. We got to learn how to balance our work and our enjoyment. We all believe. And maybe there's certain people in your life that they need to vacation a lot, like we need to go away for this, Friday, this Saturday, this week. And then they look at you and you're like, no, I just need to once every few months I need to get away and all. And they're like, you're a workaholic. Everybody's got their own rhythms. Find yours, find your balance, and find your joy in Christ, in your work and in your enjoyments. In your work and in your enjoyment. Look at verse 16. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night, then I saw the work of God. That a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, for a man labors to discover it, yet he will not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he will not be able to find it. It's a waste of time to try and understand what God is doing in areas where God hasn't told you what He's doing. We got to let God be God and you be, God, right? No. You got to be you. And you got to let God be who He is. Have you ever heard the phrase, if you're an athlete, you've heard this, most of us have heard this, stay in your lane? Got to stay in your lane. Right? Track and field, swimming, you got to stay in your lane. Why? Because if you go outside of your lane, you'll disqualify yourself from the very race that you were wanting to win. More than that, you ever seen a runner? You ever seen a runner who's constantly looking at the competition? I can tell you where that runner is not, first place. They're in the back looking at the people up front. You can't win by making everybody around you your standard. No, we have a standard. It's Jesus Christ. We have a hope. It's Jesus. As long as I beat them, how small is your hope? How small is your joy? How small is your life if you're just simply trying to beat the people around you? God didn't put you in a race to beat the people around you. He put you in a race so that you could find so much joy in Him in your lane. Oh, but Lord, what's going to happen? You remember when Peter said this? What's going to happen to John? What's going to happen to John? Some people say he's never going to die. And Jesus is great. He says, well, so what? What if he doesn't die? I want you to live your life. And you let me do what I'm going to do in John's life. Do you know how freeing it is when you and I finally stop trying to control people's lives? Oh my gosh. Because we're trying to control others. Why? Insecurity. Why? Because we don't have control of our own life. I kind of feel like I might be better at controlling your life. Like, mine's not working, but I know I'm right. So let's try it on you. Why do we have kids, right? No. So we need to understand that the authority God puts into our lives is not to abuse or to hurt or to control or to manipulate other people. Jesus did not come to control you. He came to set you free. In fact, the entire message of the Bible is this: you were under the control of sin. And Jesus broke those chains to give you your freedom back. And when he did that, he said these words: follow me. Follow me. Let's go on this journey together where I will be with you and you will be with me. And I will give you the Holy Spirit and he will guide you into all truth. Follow me. I got to learn to let go of my desire to control others, and as much as I need to not give over what God has put, the authority God has in my life, I should give to nobody else. Nobody else has the right to control those things. I told you this when I was at Bible college. You know, the two questions that every college kid would ask me, not in this order, but usually in this order, was, what is God's will for my life and who am I going to marry? Usually it was, who am I going to marry? And then second question to that is, and who am I going to marry? You know, that's the big thing in life at that point. I'm not putting it down. That's exactly that. Those are the questions you're asking. I had one girl say, man, I feel like the Lord's calling me to marry this person. I've shared this with you before, but I'm not attracted to him and I really don't like him at all. I thought about it. I thought, man, we have a wrong view of God, I think. God told me to do this, but I don't like the guy and I'm not attracted to the guy. Wow. Yeah, I'm crying for that one too. That's terrible. God told me. And if that's going to control your life, be careful with that. Only God has authority in your life like that, not other people. You know, we live in an interesting time, this democracy that we live in, where like you get to vote. So we get to vote, and it's a good thing and it's a right thing, and don't misunderstand any of this. But it confuses things when we're like, wait, is that really God if just the majority voted for that? And then we convince ourselves, wait, no, it's not really God because the majority is evil, because we know that the world is evil. We know the majority is evil, and so it wasn't God. And I got to remind you, even in a democracy, God is still on the throne. God is still in control. There's no way God put that person in that office. There's no way God put that person in that authority role over my life. We voted and the evil people voted more. No. God is working. God is always working. Can I just remind you, he may not be working the way you want him to, but he ain't finished working. I say that because my experiences here as I adjust to life in America is that we mix up democracy and Christianity. You know how many amazing Christians live in a terrible, terrible regimes all over the world? And they love Jesus, but they have no rights. They have no power, nothing at all. I don't believe that the goal in life is that America in God's kingdom, and I don't even think it's God's kingdom in America. Can I tell you what I think it is? It's God's kingdom in your life and in my life. God's kingdom in you and me. Oh, do we just give up and don't care? Of course you care. Just don't confuse it. God's working in our lives in a beautiful, unique, it's not even just God's kingdom in Chula Vista. It's God's kingdom in us. God's kingdom in his people, and God's kingdom moving across our community and touching people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. The answer will never be in a moral change. It must come from the transformative power of the gospel. I don't need people to be better. I need them to be transformed. Can I rephrase that? You don't need me to be just better. You need me to be transformed by the power of God. I need you to be transformed by the power of God. Your home needs to be transformed by the power of God. Amen? Not just a simple little change. Oh, well, now they're listening to me better. They're listening now, soon they won't. I've got them in my control. You won't forever. There's got to be a better way. It's God's kingdom today. And you remember that verse, and I'll finish with this thought. Jesus, we're told in the Old Testament that he will not quench a smoking flax. That little bit of the candle light that's burning, God won't crush it. He's so faithful, he's so gracious, he's so kind. Listen, if you feel on the very edge in life, if you feel like I'm getting pushed over and I'm not going to be able to get back up again from this, just know this, if you will let Jesus into your life in a deeper way today, I promise you, listen, he won't topple you over. People will. Situations will, not Jesus. He is so compassionate and caring and thoughtful. He's so kind. Let him in a deeper way in your life. Understand that you have power and others around you have power. It's called self-will. We want to use that wisely. You know what Jesus did with his power? He laid it down. He laid it down so that he could become one of us, to die for all of us, so that some of us would put our faith in him.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope and pray that the ministry of Calvary San Diego is strengthening and encouraging you in your faith. To follow along with what God is doing here at Calvary SD, we encourage you to download our app. Also, if you would like to invest in the ministry of Calvary San Diego, you can financially partner with us by visiting our website at calvarysd.com/give. Thank you so much and have a great day.